Alright, let's begin section 4.2, chapters 36 and 37. Pip turns 21 and comes of age. This is where he had a couple of promises. When he turns 21, he will learn some things. He's called to Mr. Jagger's office and, expecting to learn about meeting his benefactor, is surprised when Jagger still won't tell him who it is. Jaggers insists he can't tell Pip any more about it. He and Pip discuss Pip's mounting debt, and Jaggers gives Pip a £500 note, the annual sum he will receive now instead of an allowance from Wemmick. Pip will now be in charge of managing his own finances, although it isn't clear whether he has the maturity to do so. Pip asks Wemmick whether he should loan the money to Herbert, and Wemmick gives him his professional opinion in this office, that he shouldn't. Pip arranges to call on Wemmick at his Walworth castle to hear his personal opinion, his Walworth sentiments. So remember how Wemmick is kind of a different person at the office than he is at home. He's saying, well, if your opinion in the office is that I shouldn't, what about when you're at home? Okay, so he arranges to call on Wemmick at his house and waits for him while he walks with Miss Skiffins, a woman he is courting. Oh, he's courting somebody. Well, that's nice. On a walk around Walworth, the men further broach the subject of, a woman. Oh, when they say he is courting, do they mean Pip? It must mean Pip, right? Yeah, because Wemmick is married, I think. On a walk around Walworth, the men further broach the subject of Pip secretly investing his money in Herbert's career, and Wemmick's answer reflects their location. Wemmick agrees to arrange Pip's investment in Herbert's business anonymously with the help of Miss Skiffins' brother, an accountant. Pip will use his future expectations to anonymously give £100 a year to the merchant cleriker, who will hire Herbert as a partner. We can see the donation is given in kindness, and not for show of status, as it's anonymous. This is the first purely generous deed Pip has done since he came into his expectations, and it fills him with joy knowing that his expectations had done some good to somebody. In these two chapters, Dickens takes the opportunity to personify time and the two casts in Jagger's office. Time went on, whether or no, as he has a way of doing. The two ghastly casts on the shelf were not far from him, and their expression was as if they were making a stupid apoplectic attempt to attend to conversation. Apoplectic usually means like overcome with rage. Finally, Mr. Jagger shook his head, not in negativing the question, but in altogether negativing the notion that he could anyhow be got to answer it, and the two horrible casts of the twitched faces looked, when my eyes strayed upon them, as if they had come to a crisis in their suspended attention and were going to sneeze. So basically, every time he looks at the casts of the two hanged men, they look kind of different to him. They take on something akin to the conversation that's happening around them. When describing how Miss Skiffins replaces Wemmick's arm after it sneaks around her waist, Dickens does it with a simile. Okay, maybe it is Wemmick who's courting Miss Skiffins. Man, they were really unclear with the he. Well, we were supposed to have read it. Dickens does it with a simile. But at this moment, Miss Skiffins neatly stopped him with the green glove, unwound his arm again as if it were an article of dress. Simile is used again when Pip describes what Miss Skiffins is wearing. The cut of her dress from the waist upward, both before and behind, made her figure very like a boy's kite. Dickens pulls out the alliteration of the P sound again when Wemmick speaks. Before a week was out, I received a note from Wemmick, dated Walworth, stating that he hoped he had, that's a lot of H's there too, made some advance in that matter appertaining to our private personal capacities. Pip used a metaphor directly related to the tabletop. That's just a lot. Do I really need to read all of this? He uses polysyndeton again. Polysyndeton is the repetition of a conjunction. So he uses it with and 13 times in these lines. I informed Wemmick that I was anxious on behalf of Herbert Pocket and told him how we had first met and how we had fought. I glanced at Herbert's home and at his character and at his having, and. You get it. Let's move on to chapter 38. Chapter 38. Pip visits and takes Estella out frequently at Richmond, but he knows that she has many admirers and worries that they'll never be together. Although they're quite familiar with one another, more so than Estella is with any of her other suitors, Pip is unsatisfied because they aren't romantic at all. Pip doesn't want to pursue her more aggressively because he assumes it might be ungenerous to press myself upon her. After all, in his eyes, they're already betrothed due to what he believes are Miss Havisham's expectations for him. Although Estella tells Pip to take warning of her, Pip can't see beyond his own desires and doesn't need her warning against pursuing her. Doesn't heed her warning against pursuing her. So even everybody in his life is telling her, even Estella, is saying, don't pursue Estella. She will make you miserable. She's not for you. You're not meant to be with her. But he's just like, but she's so pretty. Estella tells Pip that Miss Havisham wants him to bring her to Sada's house. Miss Havisham requires Estella to recount all the suitors she has caused to fall in love with her, seeming to delight in doing so in front of Pip. Pip convinces himself that Miss Havisham has set Estella up to break all these suitors' hearts, but not his, right? Miss Havisham and Estella argue in front of Pip, and Miss Havisham accuses Estella of being ungrateful, cold-hearted, and proud. Estella replies, I must be taken as I have been made. Take all the praise, take all the blame. Miss Havisham demands that Estella love her, but Estella insists that she can't give what was never given to her. She never learned how to love, so she can't show love even to her own mother. Miss Havisham shows jealousy for Estella's love, leaving the reader to wonder whether she truly loves Estella at all, or has simply used her as a pawn in her crusade to destroy men. Estella begins to realize that Miss Havisham has made her incapable of love. Pip spends the night at Sada's house for the first time and sees Miss Havisham pacing the halls in the night, holding a candle and moaning. Later, at a Finches of the Grove meeting, Drummle tells Pip Finches of the Grove is that men's social club that Pip joined that does almost nothing and is just sort of a pointless waste of time. Drummle tells Pip that he has acquaintance of Estella, and Pip, believing he is lying, challenges Drummle to a duel. That duel is cancelled when Drummle can show Pip a letter from Estella. This leads to Drummle courting Estella, quite successfully. Pip confronts Estella about Drummle, pointing out all his flaws, but Estella brushes off his bad traits as inconsequential to her. She tells Pip all sorts of ugly creatures hover about a lighted candle. Can the candle help it? she's comparing herself to the candle, and all the boys that are into her are just moths drawn to her flame. Estella seems resigned to her fate, whatever that may be. Pip tells Estella that he is jealous of Drummle, and she becomes angry at him. She asks if he wants her to deceive and entrap him like she does her other suitors, revealing that that's what she is doing to all the men who seek her except Pip. Oh, except Pip. He is a bit of an exception. Estella is, in a roundabout way, actually trying to protect Pip. At the end of the chapter, the narrator, grown Pip, reveals that something major will happen soon in the story that will turn Pip's life on its head. All the work, near and afar, that tended to the end had been accomplished, and in an instant the blow was struck, and the roof of my stronghold dropped upon me. That's some direct foreshadowing, saying everything that led to my life as it is had already been set up, except for this one thing, that when everything went wrong, and that's about to happen. Dickens uses alliteration again. Let's see, similes aren't overlooked. Dickens uses Pip as a mouthpiece for his classic literary device of parallelism. Unadulterated parallelism materializes in this phrase: 1,000 Miss Havishams haunted me. She was on this side of my pillow, on that, at the head of the bed, at the foot, behind the half-open door of the dressing room, in the room overhead, in the room beneath, everywhere. Another metaphor, metaphor. Okay. I don't think we need to go over all of that. You should be pretty familiar with parallelism at this point. We fast forward in the story until Pip is 23 and no longer a student of Mr. Pocket. He has no job and spends most of his time reading. One dark and stormy night, so £500 a year is it's a lot of money at this time. I don't know how much it would translate into, well, let's see if we can figure it out. £500 Dickens Day is worth how much today? Yeah, here's somebody doing the exact same thing. However, this does not speak. There are periods of inflation. Prices have only 79 times. $40,000 a year tax-free is pretty good, but it's not outrageous. Okay, 40,000 a year is pretty good, but it's not outrageous. Finally, Pip's debts only amount to £9,000, which he could pay off in several years by being frugal and working hard. Okay, £40,000 is worth how many dollars? Is worth about $50,000. So that's a pretty good annual income. So no, he doesn't have to work. He could, and he could increase his holdings, but he doesn't have to. One dark and stormy night, he is reading in the temple in Garden Court, where he and Herbert now live, when someone knocks on the door. The man at the door is strange and somewhat creepy, with a lower-class accent and vocabulary. But Pip has a moment of recognition. It's his convict from when he was 5. The convict calls him Noble Pip, an ironic commentary on Pip's character, as he insinuates that Pip's help was noble when in reality it was forced by fear. The convict breaks down in tears after a drink and confesses that he is Pip's benefactor. This is the roof-caving moment that the narrator Pip warned of. The convict has sent all the money he toiled for as a shepherd to Pip to make a gentleman of him. He was expatriated to New South Wales colonies. New South Wales is in Australia. So he was sent to Australia, and if the authorities discovered him illegally in England, he would be killed. The convict sleeps in Herbert's room since Herbert is in Marseille? French, I don't know. Let's say Marseille. Marseille on business, and Pip must help him hide. Pip's life is instantly changed. He is no longer the pet of rich Miss Havisham, but part of a criminal scheme, an irony of great significance in the novel. Pip understands that this means Estella isn't, and was never, betrothed to him. So this crushes his reality. And now comes the heights of his guilt over how he has treated Joe. I could never, never, never undo what I had done. His remorse is, as always, self-serving, as he is mostly upset that his poor treatment of them didn't earn him what he wanted most, Estella. Pip is miserable, despairing this new knowledge that his expectations, both literal, monetary, and figurative, are crushed. He is afraid of the convict, and locks him in Herbert's room. Here's a little sketch of Nagwitch makes himself known to Pip. Pip is holding the lamp, and this is Nagwitch in the top hat. In this chapter, Dickens uses amplification. When a plain sentence doesn't convey the required implication, the author adds more structure for the meaning. It was wretched weather, stormy and wet, mud, 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 deep in all the streets. That's amplification. It's amplifying that feeling of stormy and wet, the feeling of mud, with that repetition. Here's another example of his fun style with the repetition of the D sound. All the truth of my position came flashing on me, and its disappointments, dangers, disgraces, consequences of all kinds. Several similes are used. picking up the theme of ships. For an hour or more, I remained too stunned to think, and it was not until I began to think that I began fully to know how wrecked I was, and how the ship in which I had sailed was gone to pieces. Dickens also prepares the reader for what's about to happen by using the literary device of foreshadowing. We mentioned that last chapter. Parallelism is used. Chiasmus, that's one. Chiasmus is one I don't think we've encountered yet. Is the literary device of using parallel phrases but inverting the words, reversing the words, when Dickens does. May I make so bold, he said then, with a smile that was like a frown, and a frown that was like a smile. Write that down. Write down that example and that chiasmus. Finally, Dickens picks up the theme of Pip's previous life compared to the one he is living now. I would not have gone back to Joe now. I would not have gone back to Biddy now, for any consideration. Simply, I suppose, because my sense of my own worthless conduct to them was greater than every consideration. No wisdom on earth could have given me the comfort that I should have derived from their simplicity and fidelity, but I could never, never, never undo what I had done. So he feels like a garbage person, because he suddenly realizes that he's been behaving like a garbage person. Analyzing Herbert, you say. Explain Herbert's character and his role in Pip's life. Well, Herbert's Pip's best friend, but he also has received an investment in his business from Pip. So Pip is his secret benefactor, just as the convict was Pip's secret benefactor. So he's a real example of paying it forward. Chapter 40. Plot summary. Pip decides to identify the convict as his uncle to the temple watchman and his maids. Calls him Provis. Says his name is Provis. He stumbles over a man crouching in the hall outside this apartment, which is concerning given the convict's illegal activities. And then when he returns with a watchman and a light to look for the man, the stranger is gone. The watchman reveals that when Pip's uncle entered the temple, he was followed by another skulking man. At breakfast, Pip asks the convict if he saw a man in the hall, but the convict denies seeing anyone. Pip is repulsed by the convict's crude table manners. He gives Pip even more money, explaining that he wants to make Pip a gentleman to spite all of the judges and colonists who crossed him. The convict equates money with being a gentleman, but his own manners, or lack thereof, indicate that he doesn't understand that there's more to being a gentleman than only money. He tells Pip that he plans to stay with him in London permanently, disguised as Provis, although his name is Abel Magwitch. He speaks of Pip in a paternal tone, calling him dear boy, paternal meaning like fatherly. In a fatherly tone, calling him dear boy, and admiring what his generosity has done for Pip. But Pip addresses him as Mr. Provis, placing distance between them. Pip confirms the situation, that Magwitch is his benefactor, with Jaggers, who takes pains not to be implicated in any of it. He insists that Pip refer to Provis as a separate person, relaying information to Pip in London on behalf of Magwitch. Ever the lawyer, Jaggers protects himself from legal ramifications by pretending this is true and insisting Pip play along. Pip buys Provis new clothes, but even nicer clothes and the money of a high-class gentleman can't tame his savage air. Oh, but even nicer clothes and, yeah. Pip is miserable and spends his days obsessing about Provis's crimes, loathing his manners, and daydreaming about how he can escape this situation. Literary devices. Magwitch is an interesting name that Dickens fashions using multiple meaning. A mage is a wise man, after the Magi, wise men who visited baby Jesus. From the Greek magos and Old Persian magush, meaning magician. The second part of the name, witch, has obvious magical connotations, and Magwitch carries a stolen Bible as a sort of legal spell or charm to protect himself from being captured. Indeed, he seems to have magic, or at least luck, on his side. But the association of the name witch also indicates a person who is condemned by society, and this is evidenced by Magwitch's experiences. Dickens also employs the literary device of allusion as Pip compares himself to Frankenstein. The imaginary student... Oh, this came after Frankenstein? The imaginary student, pursued by the misshapen creature he had impiously made, was not more wretched than I. pursued by the creature who had made me, and recoiling from him with a stronger repulsion, the more he admired me and the fonder he was of me. In his eyes, Magwitch both created him and persecutes him. Pip uses imagery topped with a simile to describe how the convict ate his food. I'm not going to read that whole thing. Pip switches gears from a simile to a metaphor. Dickens in previous chapters personified the cast on the shelf of Jagger's office. He brings the cast back to life again in this chapter. I'm not going to read that either. Okay, and finally, Dickens reverts to his classic literary device of parallelism. Okay, so much of the same, much of the same. Key points. Pip doesn't learn the name of his benefactor on his 21st birthday. It isn't until he's 23 that he learns it's his convict. Pip has been a bad influence on Herbert, as both men are now in debt. Pip offers his first true act of generosity in anonymously arranging a career for Herbert. Pip spends time with Estella, and then once realizes that she's not actually meant for him. Pip is shocked to learn that the convict is his benefactor, and instantly his life has changed. Estella isn't now, and never was, his betrothed, and he is beholden to a convict. Okay, we're done for now, and I'll meet you in 4.3.